represents 10% of our current water supply. We'd like that effort reflected in our monthly reporting that is currently being proposed today. We recognize not only the urgency that's been heard today on water conservation and the 4 points that we want customers to do, but the importance of expanding recycled water across the state is extremely important, and we feel if that's reflected in the monthly reporting by us and other retailers, it might establish some more momentum of recycled water use and projects throughout the state. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I thought that was a very thoughtful comment.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll consider that, to be sure. Next, Jennifer West, California Municipal Utilities Association. Thanks for joining us today.
We'll do the Jennifers first.
Yeah, so we're taking all Jennifers first today, and Mr. Anderson's.
There's a lot
if
of
there are
us.
any others.
Okay, so I want to thank the board because we generally support the part of the regulations that relies on local agencies' water shortage contingency plans. We think this is an appropriate mechanism to use these plans as the primary way to comply with these regulations because these reflect local priorities. And so thank you very much for listening to us on that point. We really appreciate it. Also, I want to very much thank the change proposal and how you've treated wholesale water agencies. We appreciate those changes in those. That was one of our concerns about the initial set of the regulations. We'd like you to give some consideration to agencies that have adopted allocation-based tiered budgets that may not restrict outdoor irrigation until the very last stage of their water shortage contingency plans. We'd like you to allow them to show other measures that do not include the restrictions on outdoor irrigation that can achieve just as much conservation. And the tiered rate structure, and I know there'll be others talking about this, might include severe rate increases for water above certain levels. So we think you can get to the same place using other mechanisms, and I know tiered rates is something we've been encouraging, so I wanted to put that out there. The recycled water part, thank you for the changes in the change sheet on the recycled water. But there are 3 places in section 2 that I see we still need to indicate that it applies to recycled water. The regulations apply to potable water and not recycled water. They're in sections B, restrictions on outdoor irrigation. That needs to be clear that that's for potable water. Subsection C, and then E1 as well. So thank you for making the changes in the first section, but I can give you those specific changes, so I'd like that to be consistent across the entire regulations. Also on recycled water, like the previous speaker, we're also very supportive of recycled water. We'd like you to put in your resolution that accompanies this strong statements in support of increasing the use of recycled water, encouraging customers to switch to recycled water. We think this can be very effective. On the using spray down on hardscapes, we know you made a change on that, the prohibition on hardscape spraying. Thank you for making that change, that it's specific to potable water. We'd also like you to consider exempting those types of recirculating. A lot of our members use water recirculation equipment when they spray down hardscapes, so we think I have some specific language on that. We'd like you to consider that as well. And then finally, timing. So most of the agencies I have talked to are going to need to call an emergency meeting to enact the water shortage contingency plans. We urge you to give us some more time, maybe till August 14th, to enact this. This is not only for our board processes, but so that we can notify the public, and so that the public who ultimately is going to have to comply with this has a better understanding of what we need from them. That's it. Be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Thanks for your thoughtful comments. The issue of the tiered rates or agencies that have already gone above and beyond, even if they haven't done the mandatory, is I think something we'll be talking about today. So suggestions on language that doesn't make it so vague as to make it unclear would be helpful.
All right.
That's just an announcement to everybody out there who's thinking about it.
And I'll give my other notes.
To help us during a break. Gary Collier. Again, Mr. Collier, thank you.
Hi, my name is Gary Collier, and what I'd like to say something first before I talk about what's going on in our community. But I believe myself that there is a fallacy because as objectively, if you look back at what has happened in the Delta, it is because of man. And in order to restore the Delta, it is impossible to not allow the intrusion of salt water during a drought. But that's never going to happen because people want to have their boats in the water and all that stuff. And what I'm looking at from the agricultural standpoint, okay, are we going to let all the trees down south die and all the trees north die, but just preserve this delta for all these different users so the agriculture interests there can be okay? If this is not going to change over the years, we need to have a safe way without having San Francisco just basically saying, hey, we want this water to go through the delta, and we got to, of course, keep the salt water from intruding into the delta. So that's something to really look at from an objective standpoint. What was the original type of situation? In the drought, we had 100-year droughts back in the year, and that water would intrude, the salt water would intrude. The fish is still here. It's nuts to call it a restoration, but that's beside the point. I want to talk about what's happening locally for enforcement. Now, in Parker Homes, we've always been neglected by the city of Sacramento for a variety of reasons. The mayor and the city council are like, oh my gosh, well, we make an agreement and then they say, nah, we're going to renege on that. Make an MOU with the federal government. Well, we're going to renege on that. That's all good. But right now, we have my neighbors, and I think this is a bit harsh, so it's not my words, but I'm expounding upon it, is that they call the water police, as they call it, the Nazi water police. Now, that's pretty harsh, but that's where we're getting treated. But if you go around the corner, the commercial buildings, they're not enforced. Now, why is that? Are we going to have any, we're supposed to, under our United States Constitution and possibly California Constitution, be able to have equitable treatment with our local governments as well as our national government and state government. We need to have something in there. Can we come to the water board when the city of Sacramento is doing this? Non-equitable treatment of our community. We have had non-equitable treatment in our community since 1964 when the city took it over. We thought we'd have great things coming. Well, nothing happened. And we don't have streets fixed in our city since 1942. That has nothing to do with water, but it has to do with the neglect of the city of Sacramento, except for the downtown Sacramento Kings, and we believe in our community wholeheartedly that they are raising money in our community by raising these fines to raise money for the Sacramento Kings. What has water got to do with the Sacramento Kings? I mean, come on. We can't get election? No, we can have an election on these issues, but the bottom line is, when are we going to get some results out of this and say, hey, let's have a statewide police, or have somebody in the state, like we have state highway patrol, we have state other agencies. We don't want the city in our community. They come in, we have water meters that haven't even lasted 2 years. And they're coming out, busting through people's 6-foot fences without asking, without notification, and without knocking on their door. That happened to me personally. And the guy couldn't even find my water meter. And I'd ask him, put it out in the front yard. No. They wouldn't do it, but they do it to Southland Park. Well, we'll put it in the front yard. Yeah, because they're rich. We're not. And so what happens? They come out. So the guy couldn't find the water meter. He asked me to tell him where it is. Did I know where it was? Yeah, I know where it is. I told him to get out, because if he can't find it, he's not qualified. And a couple of weeks later, they sent the professional out. He found it in less than 30 seconds. Of course, they had to bring the police officer. Little old me, I'm really a danger. How do you turn this thing off?
Thank you. I think it's on. I think it's set on.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Collier. Ken Weinberg, San Diego County Water Authority. Mr. Weinberg.
Good morning, Chair Marcus, board members. I think I did hear us mentioned earlier on in the meeting.
You're at the top of mind for everyone.
Lucky us.
Yeah.
First I want to apologize for, at the last meeting June 17th, that there were questions from board members, and we did not have a representative present at that point when the questions were asked, because our representative had to leave for a water bond meeting. So, lots of things going on up here. But I'd be happy to answer any remaining questions from that meeting or anything today, and I will be here all the way to the end of today's meeting. Okay. I want to commend the board and the staff for working with the water supply agencies throughout the state in trying to come up with regulations that would achieve the objective of decreasing water use as quickly as possible. And I have to say that we absolutely agree with the board on the dire conditions that the state is facing. And our concern, and we share it with all of you, and I know I speak for a lot of agencies in Southern California, in that we are looking with concern to 2015 and the fact that storage reserves are really sort of our only lifeline right now, and really the major difference, and we have to do whatever we can to protect those reserves. The Water Authority enacted in February, we enacted our drought response ordinance for our region. The Water Authority serves as essentially the regional trigger in San Diego County. We did go to our voluntary stage. It's clear to us that given the challenges we've seen in weather, in what we perceive to be demand hardening in our service area, that the next logical step is going to mandatory water conservation. And as this board considers and adopts the proposed regulations, it's our intent to recommend to our board of directors that they go to what we call level 2 drought alert, and that would be a signal to our 24 member agencies to move to that level that has mandatory water use restrictions and outdoor water use restrictions. We did submit a comment letter. I'd just like to highlight a couple of those comments. One is we agree with the how you're dealing with water wholesalers. Although we have a central role in trying to coordinate our region's activities, it is the retail water agencies who impose those restrictions and enforce them. And that's properly where that authority should lie. And I think, again, we appreciate the recognition that it's the retail agencies with the shortage contingency plans who have the mechanisms, who have the relationships with their customers, who will be able to impose and enforce those restrictions. As to the data collection, which we have expressed a couple of opinions on, really appreciate the identification of 2013 as the baseline to compare. And the reason that was important to us is that we feel that the residents and businesses in San Diego County have made tremendous strides in being water use efficient. I mean, between 2007, when the last drought started, in 2013, we saw a 27% decrease in per capita consumption. And that's been a remarkable achievement, and it makes it harder to save more now. But I think we're up to it. This is the next logical step. I would ask, as you collect the data on GPCD, that you work with the water supply agencies, and really, this is probably very hard to do, but we'd really discourage the comparison of per capita consumption rates among different parts of the state. They really are a metric to compare your own area's progress in water conservation. And climate, demographics, local economy, population, the housing mix, all of that really contributes to GPCD. And we'd be happy to work with your staff in trying to collect that data and explain what it does mean. So thank you, and we support unreservedly the actions that you're about to take.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Weinberg. We're going to take you up on that conversation, because I think statewide we are going to need to have more of a conversation about how we measure, what it means, why these differences which you've laid out exist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And take the big bubble maps and figure out how to bring them down to a scale that makes some sense.
Okay. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Dan Cosgrove Welcome Building Maintenance? Do I have that right? President.
Good morning. My name is Dan Cosgrove. I'm the owner of Welcome Building Maintenance in Concord, California. Basically, I am a pressure washing contractor. In the article, which was in the Contra Costa Times on Thursday, I'll quote from it. It simply states, power washing, direct application of water to any hard surface. Now, I don't see any gray area in hard, any. So my question, I had called and talked to Carlos during the week, and he said, for further verification of what we can and can't do, I should appear at the meeting. So he did tell me that the health and the health part of the aspect was we could clean that, but that only represents like 1/10 of 1%. So my question to the board is, what can we clean? Can we not clean graffiti? Now, graffiti, as you know, in commercial situations, if people remove it within a month, or within days, they're fined. So what happens there? Shopping centers. Shopping centers are going to get to look real gnarly very fast if they can't be cleaned. So I need some guidelines as to what we can and can't clean, because hard surface is everything we clean. Painting of houses. All painting of houses, they all are pressure washed prior to painting. Can a person not pressure wash your house before they paint it? So there's a loss right there. So I'm looking for a little clarification, that's all.
No, thank you. That's a fair question to figure out. Our intent is to have people not using a hose to just wash down the sidewalk and the driveways. We have a really interesting comment from Disney in particular, where they use pressure washing, but they treat and collect all that storm water, and it was really pretty interesting. Have you all thought about ways to define it more narrowly so that we're not all of a sudden putting
An industry
house
out of
painters
business.
and others at
We've given it some thought. We can discuss specific language this afternoon.
all right, that's definitely something we
I
will
can supply a
address this.
list of things that we've pressure washed over the last few years, if you want to check off.
Yeah, that'd be good. Why don't you give that to staff at some point during
I'll
the
do
break
that.
so you can
Well,
take a look at it?
and on that, I'm just wondering if there are other alternatives.
Yeah, in some
I don't-
cases a broom will
I don't
do,
know that
but-
we pressure washed our house when we
Is it-
painted it. Maybe we were bad painters. But I don't
Maybe
know
your
that
house
it's,
wasn't very dirty.
I don't know. I don't.
Yeah,
I'm
we
just
talked
wondering
to
if there
some
are
people representing the various elements in the construction industry, and there do seem to be alternatives in some cases. Like
Yeah,
used
there
it
might not be another. I mean, the question of what we're trying to do, we're not trying to cause a total change in some things. We're trying to get a rule of reason in terms of folks not using a hose when a broom will do. I mean, we're not saying people can't use street sweepers, for example.
Yeah, and
Although a lot of them use recycled water, which is a good thing, but.
and I'm thinking a high-pressure jet of air might get the dust particles out in certain applications, not all, but, just.
There's
like-
wet sand blasting, there's soda blasting, there's a lot of variations, that's right, but they all include water.
Of some sort, right. We need to think about it in terms of the drought emergency as opposed to something that
right.
requires a long-term
And it
change,
has,
because our intention in this first round was to do what was reasonable and easy to do, as opposed to torquing a hole. So yeah, so we'll have this conversation. Thank you for raising it.
Okay, thank you.
Jim Gamble, pwna.org, also on pressure washing.
Hi, thank you. I'm on the board of directors of pressurewashing.org, and what we need to know is, we want to first let you guys know that pressure washing is an industry of itself, okay? There's a lot of families that depend on pressure washing in the industry. We also noticed that, you may notice that half of the water that comes out of a hose, a pressure washer uses about 50% of that water. So when
That
I
was
think
gonna be one of
Dan
my
brought,
questions.
yeah, it's very efficient. A pressure washer is very efficient as opposed to a garden hose in using half the water. You've seen pressure washers usually are always in the industry to promote health and safety, most of them in the commercial industry. such as sidewalks for a slipping issue, or if there's gum where
Right.
an elderly would step on some gum and you, all of a sudden, it sticks to their shoe, and then they tend to trip. Painting industry where they wash your house down. The reason why they gotta wash down a house for painting is because you gotta remove all those particles. And a broom's not gonna do it, okay? So then you're gonna paint over that house, and it's not gonna provide a bond to that house for the new paint, okay? And it could prone to chip or crack or come apart. These are all cost issues in regards to pressure washing. I do parking garages for say, and we move the oil out of the parking garages, and then we have to filter it to the regulations for discharge. But I don't know if the board knows that there's pathogens found in parking garages, flesh-eating pathogens. This is a health issue right here. I know I stepped in a puddle myself while we were cleaning, and within 2 days I had to go to Kaiser Hospital because you could see the bone on my foot where the bacteria just ate right through the flesh of my foot. So, you know, when we're talking the commercial end of pressure washing, I'm not talking about the person who goes and gets the Home Depot pressure washer home special. We're talking the industry that has spent, you know, $20,000, $30,000, or in my case, $150,000 on a pressure washer in order to be efficient and in order to kill those pathogens, in order to remove any slipping hazards, okay? I mean, you know, this is our expertise. And for someone who's sitting behind a desk and just says, hey, man, you're just wasting a lot of water, that's not what we're doing. We're actually helping the environment, and we're also helping our fellow man or the elderly from slipping or falling. You know, when it rains, you know, and you don't clean that garage, where does it go? All those drains are inside the storm drain. They all go into the storm system. Mm-hmm. And then they all go out to the delta or to wherever the storm drain leads to. And we can capture that, and then we can discharge it.
That's right, you have capture rules for your pressure washing, right?
I do for me, yeah. We have a filtration system, it's 24-foot long, $150,000. So we capture all of the class 2 waste, and some of it's hazardous waste, and then we go and recycle it, and we can either use that water again, or we can discharge it into sanitary sewer. And then they'll filter it on top of us discharging it. But this is very important. I don't think the board understands about commercial. I mean, if you said residential and somebody's just gonna, you know, play around with a little residential, that's one thing. But if you're talking commercial, mm-hmm. This is something totally different, and it should be excluded from this, okay?
Thank you. We'll, as we said, we'll take this up
Okay,
this
thank
afternoon
you.
to discuss it. Thank you very much.
You.
Chris DeGabriel, North Marin Water District.
Thank you, board members, Chair Marcus. I'm representing the Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership. They asked me to come and speak to you today. Mm-hmm. That includes the town of Windsor and the cities of Santa Rosa, Rohnert Park, Cotati, Petaluma, Sonoma, and the Valley of the Moon Water District, Marin Municipal Water District, North Marin Water District, and Sonoma County Water Agency. These parties have either all implemented their water shortage contingency plans or portions thereof that include the mandatory water waste prohibitions that are now in your proposed regulations. And that was done immediately upon the governor's drought declaration, so I think we had them implemented by early February. We believe that our efforts are working in our region, yet we realize that this is an extreme drought condition. We would like to propose that the regulations be clear. We think there's some language that should be added to clarify those regulations. I'm happy to learn from your attorney that the Regulation X1B, the $500 fine, will be locally enforced. That's my understanding, but it's not clear in the, as now written. From my perspective, the outdoor water use restrictions could be clarified further, and I would suggest that it read to promote water conservation. Each urban water supplier shall implement requirements and actions of the stage of its water shortage contingency plan that impose mandatory restrictions on outdoor irrigation, or shall implement another mandatory conservation measure or measures intended to achieve a comparable reduction in water consumption by the persons it served relative to the amount consumed in 2013. So provide that clarification that would give good guidance to us going forward, especially when we communicate with our customers, which we are actively doing and have been doing since early this year. And then finally, with regard to the performance reporting, I would advocate that it be reported on a potable water production measurement. The GPCD, trying to calculate that on a monthly basis is problematic. It's difficult enough to calculate it on an annual basis, so that's typically why it's reported in our SBX 7-7 at the end of the calendar year, and I think we submit those reports in the spring of the following year. So I don't think it's reasonable that we report monthly on a GPCD basis. So thanks very much. I hope that provides some food for clarifying the regulations.
I have a question. Can you give 2 examples of what you mean by an equivalent amount? I mean, how would we know?
Well, the governor asked for a 20% reduction in water use. At that time, back in January, he didn't provide a metric of what we're comparing to, but we took it upon ourselves in our regions to compare to 2013. We did report to the survey with all the information that you requested, nonetheless. So I think that equivalent is something that we do track. We track monthly on our water production to compare how we're doing to 2013, and I think that's something that, from an overall perspective, is something that we can do locally and certainly report on to the state board. So that's an example.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. As said, we'll definitely be talking about that issue. And thanks very much for your stepping up in response to the request. Cindy Tuck from Aqua.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board.
Thank you for all of Aqua's help in the series of dialogues we've had about this issue.
It's our pleasure, and we appreciate all the work of the board and the Brown administration on the drought. As you know, we represent 430 public water agencies across the state. They provide about 90% of the water for the public, for agriculture, and business. Aqua is very pleased that the board is taking this decisive action. We hope that you take it today, and we appreciate all the work of staff in the development of the regulation in short order. We submitted written comments, and from the change sheet, I see that 2 of the issues have been resolved, the solar panel issue and the wholesale water supplier issue, so I won't comment on those this morning. I'd like to focus on 2 comments that we did make in our written comments that we submitted, and I'll provide those comments in a nutshell. So the first comment has to do with the enforcement language, and this is in section X1, subdivision B. That section is really focused on the 4 prohibited actions at the individual level. And our concern is that it's unclear from the regulation who implements that or who enforces those prohibitions. From the staff presentation, we heard it's the intent that that's to be enforced at the local level. We think that's the way it should be, but we'd suggest clarifying in the regulation that that is the case.
It is the intent, or you're not suggesting that's exclusive? I mean, it's our intent that this is another set of tools in the locals' toolbox, because as you can see, it's all, we're trying to be very respectful of local water agencies' connections to their customers and their knowledge of the local area, and the fact that enforcement tools and setups differ from community to community. But I don't think I mean, it's going to be up to the board that we were thinking we would be writing off any authority for us to take action if we felt a situation arose. We're not intending to go out and all of a sudden do that. We don't have a lot of staff. But are you saying we should exclude ourselves from being able to enforce it?
We are saying that. And we...
Why?
We appreciate that it is your intent to have this implemented, enforced at the local level, but that's how we think it should be spelled out in the regulation. This is talking about in communities and cities, as you know, the use of water conservation measures. We think that should be enforced at the local level.
And what do we do if an agency isn't enforcing it at all?
Well, this regulation today, this is a first step, and we're hoping that, as you are, that this works very well and is effective. We think give that the shot, because we think the local agencies are going to step up and do it. Many of them already have. Mm-hmm. So that is our suggestion, and not leave it open-ended. Right now it's unclear. So that's the first comment.
Okay.
The second
I'm sorry, did you provide, or do you have specific language suggestions?
In our letter, we provided a suggested change relative to where it talks about imposing the fine of up to $500 per day. We suggested inserting after the word punishable the clause at the local level. So something like that could work for the local prohibited activities. The second comment that we have relates to monitoring. And we fully support part of the monitoring provisions. You have it written in two parts. The first part that requires the reporting of the amount of potable water the urban water supplier produced in the preceding calendar month. We fully support that. That makes perfect sense. That will provide accurate information for you all. The concern we have is with the second part, and we do suggest deleting the monitoring provision, which would require the urban water supplier to also estimate the gallons of water per person per day used by the person it serves. You heard from, I think, staff already in the staff presentation acknowledged there's concerns about accuracy. Other people have testified this morning about concerns about that. You can have changes in population if you're a university town, knowing, for example, what your population is that month. There's various factors on that. So we're suggesting the deletion of that part, but keeping the first part about the produced water, which will give you accurate information.
I wanted to ask you this question. I know a number of people commented on this, and I know we talked about it at the workshop, and I still don't totally get it. Why is this so hard to do? The example of the university variation is a helpful illustration, but you can kind of figure that out. That's what we're asking for, is an estimate, not a precise measurement. And it's the kind of thing that regular people want to know.
And I think if the board goes in this direction, some clarification about how it would be used and not used would be helpful. But I have with me today the Jim Pfeiffer from the City of Sacramento. He's the chair of our Urban Water Subcommittee, and he could maybe come up and speak a little bit to this issue.
That'd be great.
About why it's difficult.
No, because this is a key, because again, it's not the kind of thing a regular person, it's not intuitive. Intuitively, those numbers are actually helpful to give people a sense of how they're doing vis-a-vis the general norm of the community, let alone comparatively. And then you can have all kinds of explanations. Obviously, in a community like San Francisco, the city, not the general service area, you tend to not have a lot of outdoor space, so their per capita numbers are tend to be lower. That's a useful kind of awareness, just as those communities that are hotter and have larger landscapes tend to use more. And someone can understand why they would have more. But it just seems like a real-world measure that's of interest and more useful than a gross percentage reduction when we have communities that have been saving for decades and other communities who are just starting now.
And we certainly appreciate that you want to have more
I
information.
just want information, not regulatory information, but information.
And that's an important, distinction. But we want you to have accurate information, and that's where the concern arises. So let me turn it over to Jim to speak more to that.
Hi, Jim Pfeiffer, City of Sacramento, and the chair of the Urban Water Conservation Subcommittee for Aqua. For some agencies, it's difficult for them to develop a population estimate. For cities and counties, that information is readily available. You can get that at the Department of Finance website, but many special districts don't have that information, and sometimes they lack the ability to, particularly smaller water districts or smaller agencies, lack the ability to get that information quickly. They may not have the resources on staff to develop that. So that's one instance.
Don't you have to kind of have an estimate of your population to figure out how much water you have to have going through your pipes? I mean, don't you have to be in the ballpark?
Number of ratepayers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's it's not real accurate sometimes. It depends on the quality of the information. You certainly know how much water is going through your system by the amount that you're putting into it. It's not always clear how much is being leaking out.
Right, right.
Another situation is it's not always clear with seasonal populations. Really,
Right, sure.
how many people are coming in, how many people are leaving. Some agencies are concerned with that throwing off the calculation.
Well, when you say, I get the point that some special districts don't have that same ability to, although they can look at census tracts they serve, but I can envision in small cases the nuance of not knowing that. How often is that going to be the case in the large water districts with over 3,000 connections, and what percentage of them might have a challenge with it? Because I'm thinking they're going to be, if the lion's share of the large water districts could get this information, I wouldn't want to say we're not going to get it because some fraction wouldn't be able to get it. So the answer would be to figure out what kind of an exception. That makes more sense to me than just saying nobody should provide it.
Okay.
I mean, but do you have a sense of the?
Speaking for my own agency, it's pretty easy to develop that information.
Yeah.
Because these are with the city.
Right, right.
It has been suggested to me that it becomes a little bit more increasingly difficult the smaller the agency is.
Yeah,
I
that
suppose
makes
that
sense.
larger agencies probably can get that information fairly quickly.
And I guess, to me, that because this is quite an important reporting issue, and the cost associated with trying to figure this out, particularly if you're small. What is our purpose in getting the information? If we have a good reason for getting that information and then using it, is it for education purposes, communication purposes? I assume that that's why the Department of Water Resources collects that kind of information in their urban water management plans. But I guess that's, as we have the discussion in the afternoon, I think we should talk about why are we doing it, and if it's worth the effort, then we should go for it. If it's marginal, well, then we should perhaps think about it, or maybe there is an alternative that other speakers can speak to, because I'm still struggling with that one too.
And I'm just wondering, maybe for later discussion, if we could get more information on those where the information could easily be gathered, just cities, or are there other examples? I really like this approach, because I think that so much of what we're doing today is making this more real for the general public, and I can't come up with another way to make it more real for the general public, because a 20% reduction from what? It's sort of confusing. I kind of liken it to the the utility bill that I get, where I'm starred. You know, am I a good actor compared to other similar homes that were built that same year? And it's pretty easy for me to just look at the star. I don't know if we could I don't think we could develop something like that, you know, in this short order, but gallons per day, we probably could. And I really appreciate your testimony about, on your earlier comment on local enforcement, that you're saying that, you know, this is a beginning stage, let's see how we do. And just asking you to consider something like that on gallons per day. Would there be a way for us to gather this information, and then, as the chair indicates, some sort of exemption, you know, where it's difficult, or when we get the reports, maybe we could have a little asterisk where we're indicating or footnoting that the information may not be accurate, but hopefully many others on the list will be accurate.
Right, and we're just asking for this of agencies of that serve 3,000 or more.
That's correct.
Right, large agencies. All right, thank you. That's a lot to think about and very helpful.
One last thing.
Sure.
And I'll get to that. I wanted to just
Okay.
say one other thing. On this monitoring issue, I think discussion about how it would be used, you know, is it really needed, the effort to get it, that kind of thing. I think that discussion would be very helpful. If you decide to go in the direction of including it, I think there should be follow-up conversations about, in more detail, how it would be used and what would be communicated.
Well,
So
we
we're
want to
not
make it easier for people as opposed to it being a endless task.
Right. The final comment I wanted to make was back on enforcement. We think it would be good to clarify in the regulation that the enforcement language, the prohibitions in the regulation do not in any way affect or limit the existing authorities
yeah.
of local water agencies, because, as you know, many of them have great programs
Right.
already in place. So spelling that out in the regulation would be very helpful.
Yeah, that doesn't seem too hard to do. I'll leave it to Carlos to figure it out, but that seemed like a very thoughtful, that's our intent, again, so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you
both.
very much.
Thanks. That was
Thanks.
helpful.
Very helpful.
Oh,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
No, this is actually for more Max as an outgrowth of this discussion. Thank you. So we talked about what's in, you know, things to report, and we talked a little bit about enforcement authority and who carries that out. Have we thought about, within these reports to the state board, how much reporting of the enforcement actions that have occurred at the local level should be reported?
Ah,
We have not.
there's an idea,
It's a good idea.
yes. I don't have any little gold stars, but I would pass one down if I did.
That might be a way to address the issues in terms of the concern of the state coming in unannounced, you know, if that's a concern, but more so just to allow the locals to demonstrate the efficacy of the enforcement action they've taken, either under their existing authority
right.
or under this new emergency regulation authority if we do adopt it.
We'd have to think about, you know, how to do it so it wouldn't be burdensome.
Right, correct.
There's a lot of different enforcement that goes on.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, I've always stated that from this position, we don't want to have overly burdensome reporting, but it might be useful to inform, you know, the progress that the locals are making. Thank you.
Great. Next, Janet Goldsmith, General Counsel, Placer County Water District. I'm sorry, what I do sometimes is I say who's on deck. I just forgot to do that. After that, it'll be Tracy Quinn from NRDC.
Thank you. I'd like to, Jan Goldsmith for Placer County Water Agency. Before I begin my remarks, I'd like to respond, I think, to Director Moore's comment about reporting on enforcement actions. And I make that comment from the standpoint of an agency that has achieved 18% or thereabouts reduction to date. And I certainly would not like an agency to be dinged because they aren't chasing down people who are actually
Voluntarily conserving.
voluntarily
Fair point.
conserving. It just seems not a good idea. Now, if you want to do it to people who aren't making 20%, perhaps that makes a little bit more sense, but I think that you ought to really think very carefully before you start throwing those kinds of numbers out to the public and the press.
Oh, right. No, I take that to heart. And yet, also caution to everyone, about if you've been able to get 13% relative to 2013, that doesn't mean you don't have folks who could do a better job locally.
I agree with that.
So I think it kind of goes both ways.
But I'm concerned about chastising agencies that are doing a good job. I will say that Placer County Water Agency appreciates the board's leadership and supports the substantive measures that are in the proposal. We do have 3 concerns. One relates to the distinction between retail and wholesale roles. Placer County Water Agency has both a retail function and a wholesale function. And the second one has to do with clarity of enforcement authority, which I will get into. And the third one is the basis for the regulation in the first place and possibly adopting a variance process. As I said, Placer County Water Agency has had its water emergency regulations in force for, well, since the spring. And has had a very good response from its customers and has a very good relationship with its customers in terms of making the message apparent to them and getting cooperation. We are very fortunate. And we concur in Aqua's comments. So, and we've been working with Aqua in their comments, but there are 3 concerns that are specific that go beyond Aqua's comments. And the first is this issue that relates to the distinction between wholesale and retail. We believe that we appreciate the proposed modifications that would impose the substantive elements through the retail.
You can have an extra minute because that was
Okay.
a helpful.
But in terms
Colloquy.
of reporting end uses, we don't necessarily have or can get the information on per capita per day kinds of figures. The retail suppliers have that. We
Right.
think that that reporting should be imposed on the retailers, not on wholesalers. Secondly, and I think I'll get to this because I haven't mentioned it and we'll get into it, but secondly, in the variance process, these emergency regs are based on a finding of emergency. And yeah, you've had 2 comments, one from Humboldt Mutual and one from me, saying Eastern Sierra landowners, and you can see it in your water reduction amounts. Your North Lahontan has not, in fact, has had an increase in use. And this reflects really the fact that there is not a water shortage in the North Lahontan area. Placer County Water Agency supplies water to areas within Martis Valley and Truckee area. That groundwater basin is in good shape. It's in as good a shape today as it was last year, and nobody knows what next year's going to be, but this year's use is not going to really forecast what that will be. Humboldt, I think, is in the same position. It's got good supply. It's in the same position that it would be 5 years ago to find out what next year's supply would be. There's not an emergency that justifies the regulations. Now, that's not to say that the substantive regulations are not a good idea, but I also would note that the entire state is under a mandate to reduce water use by 20%.
Right.
So we're talking about the extent to which the extraordinary regulations should be imposed on these areas. And I think that it makes less sense for you as a board to try to carve out who might or might not be in a water short area than it would be for you to adopt a variance process, such as you did for the curtailment regulation, that authorizes a process and authorizes your executive director to issue variances on petition and is showing that there is not a lack of water shortage conditions and that there is no hydrologic connection with a water short area, because
Right.
even where there is plenty of water, if there's conservation, it may help out other areas where there isn't. So that's one thing I would suggest. Now, the other main concern I have, and it's been mentioned by a number of folks, and that is an infraction is a criminal penalty. Many agencies do not have police power to enforce them, and it's not clear and I have my own opinion about whether or not this board can endow police power on them. I don't think they can. It's not clear what the link is between what you do and excuse me, what the local agencies are directed to do and how they get the authority to do what you told them to do. There's similarly a lack of clarity as to the basis of that authority. As I mentioned, it has to be based on reasonableness, I think. The extent of their discretion, which I think has been mentioned here, and you've amended or proposed amendments to the proposal to take care of that. But the other thing is, who gets the money?
It depends. I'll let Mr. Mejia explain it. The reason we're deferring to locals on that is that there are in most communities all kinds of agreements about where fines go, and we wouldn't purport to change that. So it would be whatever the local authority is.
Well, if they're enforcing your regulations, I think that it would be necessary to have something in the regulation that refers to that. And finally, I do have a suggestion in terms of the problem of the extent of legal authority. And by the way, Placer County Water Agency is contemplating getting an Attorney General's opinion on whether they have mandatory authority to impose fines, to do a lot of things that it maybe is assumed that they can do. We know we have the authority to cut people's water off.
Oh, interesting.
We tend to try not to do that too cavalierly. But I think that if you add to your regulation a direction that local agencies enforce it, quote, to the extent of their legal authority, that would provide both clarity and comfort and would get you the best bang for your buck.
Right, so they don't feel they're put in an impossible box.
Right.
All right. Thank you for
Thank you very
flagging that.
much.
That's one of the issues I'm sure we'll be talking about.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Do you want to illuminate that a little bit?
I'd be happy to,
now,
Madam
and
Chair.
we'll come back to it.
I'd like to speak first to the question of authority and make one point that may be useful for the board's clarification. The authority for the infraction doesn't come from the board's saying so in the regulation. It comes from the law that the legislature passed and the governor signed into law earlier this year. 1058.5 subdivision D states that in addition to any other applicable civil or criminal penalty, violation of a regulation that the board adopts in response to a drought emergency is an infraction. That's true whether or not the board explicitly says so in its regulation, and the remedy for changing that is with the legislature. So I think that clarifies, first of all, what the board's authority is and what the authority of local agencies is. We are of the mind, and I know that there have been some in the comments who have expressed some disagreement about this, that not only peace officers, but any employee of a local agency charged with enforcing laws pertaining to water use who has been so authorized to do so by the local agency can issue these infractions. That's set forth in the penal code. Certainly, if the board so desires, we can discuss ways that we can make that clearer to the local agencies who might be implementing this. But that's also something that's set forth in state law. And then finally, Chair Marcus, to the question as to who gets to keep the fines. As you and I have discussed, there's a considerable variance in that. That's also set forth in the penal code. Effectively, there is a portion of the fine that the local agency gets to keep that ranges anywhere from 5 to 75%. And as to what the local agencies do with that, that also comes with considerable variance. But that's also something else that is